Hello, friends. Hello, everybody. I don't know if you're out there yet. A lot of folks said they're going to catch it later because it's so late tonight. However, there's still light in the sky. And if we want to do this by candlelight, well, then in the summertime, it's just going to have to be a little bit later. It's kind of nice to be back. It's freezing up here, and we have a frost warning actually. So I made a pot of hot tea. Got a cup here. This cup is pretty meaningful and meaningful to our story today. This is a cup that my sister Kate brought. So 2 weeks ago, my sisters and I all gathered for a sisters weekend up in northwest Wisconsin at our family lake. And we have never done this. This was the first annual sisters weekend together. And it was, I can't tell you how delightful it was. There was so much laughing and so much talking and heartfelt conversations. And did you see that light just go by with the spotlight going over me? Yeah, they're looking for a fugitive in town here. So, oh well, if they find me, I'll toss a cup of hot tea at them. Anyway, sorry. So when we went up north, I had a plan, and I think I spoke to you about this plan in the last time I was here, talking about Grace in the cabin, Grace in the hunting lodge up in Wisconsin. However, she did not remain there. She, first you're here and then you're everywhere, and she found a spot very near me, and she had very important things that she wanted me to know. I'm going to back up just a little bit for those of you who haven't heard the other stories. So I'm going to do just a little bit of a recap. Otherwise, none of this will probably make sense. So there was a hunting lodge up in northwest Wisconsin near our family home, and it was haunted AF. Can I say that? It was very haunted. Multiple spirits in that place. But one that was very predominant was a girl that I saw in the sink, that we all saw in the sink, in the trout kitchen sink. The trout kitchen was a room between the two sides of the building, and it was where fish were cleaned. It was originally a fishing lodge. And the first time I went there, walking past that sink, out of the corner of my eye, I just got this flash of red. And it was like just splashing, just red. And my sisters all saw the same thing. And then going back in the other direction, I saw her there. And I would see her in windows, and I would see her standing outside windows, looking up at me. When I first met Grace, it was horrific, and I recoiled. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to see this. And it scared the heck out of me. And so I tried to avoid it, but she was so persistent. The next times that I saw her, she was still ferocious and persistent and trying to give us information. And when you're talking with spirit, when you're dealing with spirit, it's not real linear. There's a lot of disjointed or symbolism and things like that, but she was persistent. And for many, many years, I think the first time I saw her was probably, 30 years ago. I think it was about 30 years ago when I first saw Grace. So this has been a 30-year saga. Not every day, every minute, but I've always felt her presence. And whenever I sit down at my altar and I focus and I call in my allies, my angels and my ancestors, I always feel her presence there. It's like, hey, I'm still here. And it wasn't like, hey, I'm still here, get with the program. It was just like, so I knew she was still there. So I had some, last fall, I went she visited with me when I was up north. And we went to the local cemetery where my parents and my brother are buried, and where Roy and Mary are buried, along with their infant child. And she got me there. I mean, I felt her riding in the car with me. There was much more to that story, and go back and listen to the story just prior to this one for that, because I'm not going to rehash that or I'll be here till Tuesday. So, but she brought me to that cemetery and brought me to the graves of Roy and Mary and baby Leroy, and said to me, and this was the first time that I heard her voice, I know what her voice sounded like. She said, "I should be here." And then her whole story was revealed. So listen to the last one I did of this. It's also on YouTube if you don't want to scroll through the page here and find it. Same name, Ghost Stories with Spooky Miss T.I. on YouTube. Some people really prefer that, so just got in the habit of putting them up there after I do them here. So since last fall, she has been there, and it has, it has haunted me. She has not haunted me, but it has haunted me that she said, "I should be here." And it just, I felt this deep connection with her, and I felt a love for her, and a responsibility to her. And so I tried to, since last fall, I've been trying to think of how can I help her. I mean, it's pretty arrogant to think you can help spirits, but she was asking me, and so I thought, well, I can't really do anything for her except acknowledge her and maybe do a little ritual for her, a funeral for her. So before I went up north with all my sisters, oh my gosh, that was a blast. I'm going to say that a lot. Oh, I should tell you, did I tell you Kate gave us these cups? It has all 5 of us. It has big sister, little sister, middle. All 5 of us were there. Anyway, so one of the first mornings, back up, I carved a stone. And my goal was that it said grace on it, on the top. And at this cemetery, a lot of people put extra stones, usually painted stones or things, on the graves. So I knew it would not be obtuse and someone would, it would not draw attention, unwarranted attention. But I got a round or an oval stone, black stone like this. It was a Lake Michigan stone. And I used this little engraver tool that is actually Bunce's, but I'm using it, sorry. I carved grace in it, and on the back of it, I just carved rest in peace. And my intention was to take that to the cemetery, to her family grave, and place it there with them. So just a couple of days before I went, I started to get like visions. I guess it was, I would, the closest thing would be visions. I would get these flashes of information. And one that kept reoccurring was the Dairyland Cemetery. Now this is many miles from where where her folks are buried, but it is west of the lodge, and the other one is east of the lodge, the Wascott Cemetery. So I just kept getting this. Now, I have to tell you that all my life, all my adolescent and adult life, I have been intrigued and drawn to the Dairyland Cemetery. I do not know any of the names there. All of the people from my childhood and my family's history and past are in the other cemetery that is miles east. But we drive, it's just on the other side of the St. Croix River. And I would go there and I would just feel so familiar there. Even as a teenager, when I was when I was a teenager, when I was like 16, 17 years old that summer, there was all kinds of news stories about people that were practicing the occult and were messing around in the graveyard at the Dairyland Cemetery, messing around at that one. And so that was intriguing to go and see that. This was before I realized that this was before I realized who grief eaters were, the entities that dwell in cemeteries that absorb our grief. And we feed them the grief and they give us relief. It's part of I believe it's part of the natural mourning process. It's why humans ritualize burial, or some ritualize the death of loved ones, because I think it attracts these entities, and we take care of each other like bees in us, you know. So I've always been interested in that cemetery, and even as an adult, I would, when we go to the river, I would just feel compelled to drive in and park and just walk around in that cemetery, and it's all on a hill, and there's some big trees in the cemetery, and it's you go up, you drive in the front, and it's straight up at the top of the hill is the end of the cemetery, and has multiple graves going back to the early part of the 20th century, the earliest ones that I saw, that I noticed. People born in the 19th century, of course, but who passed away. These are pioneer people, that were up in this area. And I just always found it compelling. So I had these flashes of knowing that somehow the girl in the sink was in the Dairyland Cemetery. I knew she was there somehow, and I knew she was buried without any kind of marker or anything. So a few days before, I went out to I have a gate key wheel out in the back of my yard that is dissolving into the earth, which I love as well. And I found a stone about this big that was white, and I took that and had a little fossil in the corner, and I carved on the top of that, Grace, 1940 to 1954. That's what I saw. I saw a gravestone with 1940 to 1954. And this coming from her presence, the closer I got to going up north, she was like there all the time. She was there when I would go to sleep. She would be there when I would wake up. She would be there when I would do my meditations. She was just there. She was not annoying. She was waiting. She was making sure that I was still on board, I think. So I carved that in this white stone. And I knew I was going to put it someplace in the Dairyland Cemetery because I believe that's where her body was buried. So I went up north with my sisters, and I carried these two stones with me, along with multiple protections, because I let every other spirit in that area that has tried to get me to hear their story, I said, I am not here for you. You take a number. I'll be back. But right now, this is just all about this girl, and I am not giving anybody else any attention whatsoever. So stay back. So I made my own oils. I've been making my own oils, and I'm really liking doing that. Took my Cree and some other things to make sure that no unwanted. I didn't want to hear the story of the other little girls. I was there for a funeral. I was there for Grace's funeral, and that's what I felt like. I was there to facilitate a funeral. So this morning, my sister Annie got there. We had Annie. We didn't have the stove was broken when we got there. Something was up with it. It was actually the outlet and the connecting box, the electrical connecting box. Something had there was some kind of surge or something that had fried it. We were trying to get an electrician, and of course, it was the weekend and no electrician even answered the call. So Annie took a look at it. She says, "Oh, I can fix this." And she went, got her toolbox. But that morning, and by the way, she did fix it. She fixed several other things while we were there too. But that morning, with the stove not working, she came over with an egg bake for everybody, and on it, bless her heart, she put a piece of paper with duct tape with every ingredient that was in it, because we're all French poodles, you know. My sister Kate and I have celiac, and somebody else is allergic to this and that. And so she had just gotten there, and I was needing to go. I had asked my sisters if they wanted to go with me. I had this picture of it being a funeral with all of us there. And they very wisely said to me, "No, this is something you need to do alone." And boy, they were right. They were right. If we were all there together, I would not have experienced what I experienced, which I'm going to tell you about now after sipping some more tea. So I had my protections, and I had the headstones, and I put them all in my little bag that I keep my portable altar in, but I took this stuff out and just had that. And I got in my little car, and my plan was that I was going to, once again, I was going to start at the nearest cemetery. And as soon as I turned out of the 2-track that goes back to our house, as soon as I turned out of there, I knew I was going to Dairyland first. So I was like, okay, here we go. And I started driving, and as soon as I hit T, there she was next to me. And I could see her out of the corner of my eye. This happened in the fall as well. She was sitting in the car with me, but she was not looking at me. She was like looking out the window. And when I would turn to look at her, she would just go. And then when I'd look back up, she'd materialize, or whatever you call it. And then she started getting into my head. And I felt like, when I ride in the car with my grandson, who's a teenager, or any of the kids, we talk, and they tell me all these wonderful things going on, and I listen, and I just let them tell about their life, and I totally, no judgment, just delighted to hear the things they're discovering. And that's what it felt like with Grace. As I was riding, I felt like she was telling me. And I remember I told you that when Spirit communicates with me, it's like a memory that isn't my own. So I am seeing all of this all at once, and I know as she's looking out that window, it is coming from her directly into my consciousness. And I paid attention to the road, and I let it come through. And she showed me everything that happened from the very beginning. She showed me how she went for a ride in the car with this really cute boy who was from the city, and he had a car, and he was like a family, their families knew each other, and he was just, he wore a leather jacket. He was just cool as could be. And she had like a little crush on him. Every time she saw him, she got butterflies. So he took her for a ride in the car, and they stopped to neck, and while this was happening, it went further than what she thought. She had no idea what was going on. She had no clue what sex was. She had never been with a boy, even held hands, none of this. She was just this super innocent little 13, almost 14-year-old girl with a crush, and this guy made her feel wonderful. And then the next thing she knew, she didn't know everything that happened. She did not understand what had happened to her. But then she went home, and he went home, and it wasn't like they were dating. It was like a one-time adventure. And a few months later, her mother noticed her getting a bump, her mother noticed her belly swelling and said, "What's going on?" And she said, "What? I don't know. I'm getting fat, And she said, "No, this is not right." And her mother felt her belly and slapped her and said, "What have you been doing? You're pregnant." And she said, "I don't know. I don't know what I did. I don't know what I did." And her mother was just beside herself. And, "Who did this to you? Who did?" And she didn't know who did. She didn't know. Didn't make the connection between her time in the car and her being pregnant. She did not make that connection. And so she said, "Have you been with a boy?" And she said, "Yes, I've been with a boy." And she said who it was. And so Mary said, "Well, we're going to take care of this. She was just so upset. Her only child, young girl. And so they told her father, who called the father of the boy and said, "You have to make this right." And they decided that it was best for both of them to not have a baby. This was 1954. And so the father of the boy arranged, he found someone who could do the procedure, do an abortion. And they made arrangements to do it in the fall, in September, at the lodge, because no one was there. It was extremely isolated. They had a house in town, and if somebody came to the house in town, everyone would know something was up. Everybody knew everybody's business, but way out there, no one would notice anything. And the only ones there was this doc, and she said the doc, and her mother, and her father was outside waiting for her by the car. And her mother had brought a quilt that she had made. I could see the quilt. It was tied, it was yarn tied, and it was like a light color. It reminded me of the bag that I carried. It was like, it had multiple colors of pinks and browns and pale blues and things in it. And she had brought that to wrap her daughter up in after the procedure to take her home, because she knew she would be, uncomfortable. So in order to make it less painful, they had her drink whiskey, and she drank a lot of whiskey and Coca-Cola. And on this, the sink had these big sides, and it was like this, where you could put the fish on both sides, and it was a big, long sink. It was probably 3 foot, at least, long sink, and 2.5 feet wide, deep. And she went up with her mom, and her mom made her take a shower so she'd be clean, so maybe no infection. And then she went downstairs, and she felt her body pierced, and then she felt warm. And the next thing she know, her mother is panicking and screaming, and she just kind of fell asleep. She just kind of fairly quickly faded. She wasn't very big, and she must have been hemorrhaging quite a bit, because in just a very short time, she just kind of, and then she was out of her body. And then she showed me her mother just screaming, blood-curdling screams, and her father come running in. And he's like, oh no, what do we do? And the doc says, you have to figure this out, I'm out of here. And she did not know his name. I don't even know if they knew this person's, this butcher's name. But he left, and there they were with their dead child. And the blood was running, had run down the sink drain, and the sink drain exited the house onto a flagstone, like patio right outside the screen, the breakfast sunroom doors. And they sat there and just wept and wept and wept, and decided they needed to bury her, but they would not bury her in the woods, although that would have been the safest thing to do, because no one would ever find her if they just found her place in the woods. But they couldn't do that. And so what they did is they, in the bright sun, like the day I was there, they wrapped her up in that quilt. And they carried her body. Her father carried her body into the car, and her mother climbed in the back seat. And he took a shovel from the shed right there, the barn right there, and he put that in the back. And he got in and drove to the Dairyland Cemetery. And her mother held her like she was asleep, and she could feel her mother holding her. Even though she was gone, even though she was dead, she remained there with her leaning, her mother was holding her and just rocking with her, just rocking with her baby. This is a hard one. So then they went in the main gate, and by this time, I'm right about at the main gate. And so I go to turn in, but it's locked, and there's a new road down a little ways. So I saw them go through up that center road and just on the other side of the hill and stop. And so I went past that gate. It's a very small cemetery, so it's, maybe 100, 200 feet or something. And I drove up and around, and there was a new road built. And I knew that they had buried her just outside the cemetery, on the edge of the cemetery. And this new road that was built, my heart just sank, and I thought, oh, no, is she under this road? And so at that point, I just pulled up and I parked where I saw the car in her memory, where that car was like this. I parked like this on the main road. When I got out of the car, you couldn't see the county road. It was down over the hill a little bit, so it was hidden from the county road. And I got out, and then she was gone, and I'm like, wait, you have to tell me where you are. And she was gone. And so I did the only thing that I could do. I called the grief eater that dwells in that cemetery. And I said, I felt the sadness, because I had watched all this, so I was already grieving, and I just called on this earth elemental entity, and I said, help me find where she is. Because when I had been there before, I connected with that grief eater when I was there last fall. And it gave me the impression that there was something extra here, that there was somebody extra here in this cemetery. And I thought at first that it was that, if you watch true crime, people will bury another body on top of a new dug grave, on top of somebody else's coffin, and, you never know. But, so I was thinking that, so I said, help me. Where is she? Where is her body? And immediately I saw this big tree. This is when I'm looking at the ground, so I'm picturing this big tree. And I see I see the mother in the car, the father grabbed the shovel, and at the base of this big tree, he dug a grave, and it was not a shallow grave. He dug a grave. And then he threw the shovel down and went and picked up his daughter, and the two of them walked to the base of this tree, and she was wrapped all up in this blanket, and they placed her gently in this grave, just weeping, and covered her up. Just devastated, and then they drove away. And so I looked for the big tree, and off at the edge, and sure enough, just in front of me a little, and out probably 25 feet from the edge of the cemetery, they had put a new flagpole and a veterans memorial in the cemetery there. So they had pushed the edge of the cemetery into the woods. But this tree was further still into the woods. It was like 25 feet or more beyond this. And I looked at that tree, and it was the biggest tree. And I thought, that's got to be it. So all the others were pretty young. So I started to figure out how I could get there. I got the white stone. I had the white stone in my hand. I had the white stone in my hand when I was calling out to the grief eater. And there was like a deer path that, it was all overgrown in a serious tick season. So there was like a deer path that went a little bit nearer to my car, between my car and the tree. And I thought I could walk back through that and wind my way. It looked like I could wind my way back towards the tree. And as I was going, I went into the woods, maybe 20 feet, and I'm in an angle towards this great big, it's a deciduous tree. It was not a pine tree. And as I'm going, my attention is drawn just to my right, and there is a huge, huge moss-covered stump. And immediately I got that rush, like bingo, and I knew that had been the tree. And it was no longer there. It was cut down, and it was all moss. The stump itself was moss covered. And I thought, and so I said, "Is this where you are?" And then she's there. And so I walked through the brush as carefully as I could. I wanted to bring my phone to take a picture of the stone where I placed it. And when I got there, I could not find my phone. So I thought, I probably left it back at the house. And then I thought, this is just as well. This is between her and me. My sister said, you need to do this alone. And why would I take a picture? Do you take pictures at funerals? Not so much. So I had in my pocket the card from my father's funeral that I keep in my car, and it's got an excerpt from the Prayer of St. Francis. And I knew I was going to read that. I was going to place the stone, I was going to read that, and I was going to sing a song. And so I made my way to the stump, and I just stood there looking around it, and I knew exactly where her body was and which way it faced. Her head was toward the tree, and her body was was out toward the west. So her feet were facing the west. So I took the stone and I placed it in this spot right against, flat on the ground, pushed it in, so that it was in the ground well. And I read the prayer, and I sang Amazing Grace. And I said, rest in peace. And then I turned and I made my way back to my car. And I knew my next stop was going to be her family's grave. So I got in the car, again, blocking any other energy from the lodge that was trying to get my attention. And when I got in the car, she was not sitting next to me, but I knew she wasn't left at the Dairyland Cemetery. Let me heat this up just a minute. Let me take this. This is the tea cozy, and I'm going to heat up my tea. So I get in the car, and I look around for my phone, making sure I didn't drop it outside, and I don't see it. And so I'm like, good. And I started driving, and I drove down and turned right, headed east toward the Wascott Cemetery. And as I was driving, I knew she was in the car with me, but she was not next to me. And she was in the back seat, but she was not alone. She was like in the middle of the back seat. And out of this side of my eye that was towards the car, I'm pretty sure it was her mother. And the person behind me that I couldn't see, I'm pretty sure was her father. So all three of them were in the car with me in the back seat. This is, yeah, that sounds crazy, but it's not. It's what happened. So I drive in, turn, take the road, pull into the cemetery, and I don't recall where her parents' grave was. And so as I'm driving in that end road, straight ahead of me is the like, in a glass box, the map of the cemetery. And I'm going to drive up to that and find it again, try to remember where it was. And instead, I just stopped the car. And I turned the car off just right where I was. And I got out, because they three of them just disappeared. And I got out and I looked, and I was right. There was the family grave. So I was like, oh, thank you. You saved me having to go do that. Now, while I was driving there, while they are in the back, I didn't want to sing the same song at this cemetery. I wanted to find a different hymn. And so I was singing in my mind, I was no longer really connected with, I was not getting a story from them. So I was like thinking, Just a Closer Walk, Angel Band, How Great Thou Art. I'm thinking of all those songs that would be appropriate for a funeral. And as I turned down Cemetery Road, not into the cemetery, but as I turned down the road to the cemetery, all of a sudden in my head pops John Prine's song, Angels from Montgomery. And I'm singing it in my head. And I'm like, wait, focus. Is this your squirrely mind just rambling here? Just focus. Get back to a hymn. And so then I settled on a hymn and parked the car and went up to the grave. And I was holding the stone, and they weren't there. And I was going to set it down between the mother and the father. They had a baby who died in infancy, and that was buried on just next to the mother's headstone. And so I was going to put Grace's stone between her mother and father. And as I started to do that, I felt like something moved my hand. I don't know if it was Grace or her mother, or both, just moved it on the other side by her mother, between her and her brother and her mother. I'm starting to shake here. So I placed it there, and I stood up, and I read those words again, and I sang the song. And I was just standing there, and it was so quiet. And it was this beautiful, beautiful day. And all of a sudden, she was right next to me. Light. Peaceful. Happy. And she said, in the voice that was her voice, I will never forget her voice. She said, "Here lies Mary Grace Combs. May she rest in peace." And then all of a sudden it was like, Angels from Montgomery. What's the first line from that song? I am an old woman named after my mother. The reason I think I haven't been able to find Grace, any record of Grace, is because I've been looking for Grace. I need to look for Mary Grace. She was named after her mother. She was Mary Grace. And I just was like, oh, okay. Rest in peace. Rest in peace, this poor family, this poor family, this broken-hearted family. May you be united together forever and just let this life go. So I stood there for quite a while and just felt the sun and looked around, and people had started to gussy up the graves because the following weekend was going to be Memorial Day weekend, and someone had put, her father was a veteran, and someone had put a flag on his grave, and there were plastic flowers. And so I fixed those up, and the one that had fallen over, I put over near her stone. And I said, I'll visit you like I visit my family. And then I got in my car and drove around and stopped to where my parents are laid to rest, and got out and said, just, I remember you. I love you. Always will. I feel your love still. And I felt, my mother always denied any kind of haunting. And this may have been my own head trip, but I don't think so. I know I always say that this really isn't happening, but I really felt like gratitude from not just that family, but from my parents and from all the other people that are connected there. I just felt this sense of completion, of gratitude, of a job well done. And so next I went in the news section where my brother Tom, and I got out there and just talked to him for a couple minutes. I know you don't have to be in the graveyard to talk to him, but remember who dwells there. The grief eater is there. And so when you feel a sense of loss, when you feel you miss your loved ones who have passed, and you go visit their grave, you can give your grief. Whatever stage of grief it is, you can give it to the earth. You can give it to the beings that are there to help us as humans cope with our fragile lives. So, went back to the house, feeling, a lot of times when I do this kind of work, I feel drained, and I need to do a refocus, reposition my energy, because I've given so much of my psychic energy to a task like this. But when I got back and I walked in to the kitchen, and I heard my sisters out on the porch chuckling away with Annie's little brown bag, and I won't tell you here what that contained, but it was what made everybody giggle a whole lot. And just went out there and just said, how was it? And I said, perfect. And then that was all I needed. It was full. I was full again. So that's probably the conclusion to Mary Grace's story. But nobody called her Mary Grace. They called her Grace. Maybe. Who knows? There may be some time that she'll become an ally for me, that there will be a situation where she will help me see things, and I'm not sure if that's going to be with the other spirits of the lodge, because I think they were pretty much aware of each other, and she may come back to help support and guide me towards that. So for 30 years, she's been there waiting for me to hear her story and to complete the ritual that she really wanted to happen. And now it has. And I would not be surprised if I see her again. But for now, Mary Grace Combs, rest in peace. Thanks for listening. So, peace to you all. I have another story from that weekend that I'm not going to do right away, but I will. I posted some pictures in this on the group, the Spooky Misty Eye group of the Roadhouse Saloon, and I have some stuff to tell about that as well, but not tonight. This is, grieving again. So, my friends, be kind to each other. We are all wounded, and we are all just learning. So be kind, be patient to yourself and to others, okay? Have a good night.